I'm Linda Moyer and it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of Best Buy Health. Best Buy Health is a innovation division within Best Buy focused on enabling care in the home. So this topic is near and dear to me. As technology advances, the landscape of what is possible in healthcare has greatly expanded. We are seeing with a shift in medical monitoring where it used to happen in the hospital or doctor's office, and it's moving into the home and in our daily lives with sensors that are on our wrists, our fingers, devices in our homes. It's enabling access to clinical grade near real-time data that's empowering people in their health and allowing more personalized and proactive care. So I'm excited to explore the possibilities and the challenges with these technology with our panelists today. So to get us started, I'm going to have the panelists introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their background and their focus area, and then share where they see these technologies transforming care today and in the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you, Linda. I'm Sri Vasireddy. I'm the founder of RAIN Foundation. As a background, I think there's a lot of emphasis on access to care. We talk a lot about inequity in access to care, but if you magically eliminated the access to care problem, I think what we will be left with is the adherence to the advice that they get, right? And that is a very big challenge. And what we do as a foundation is how can we make that adherence? The impossible goal is it should happen automatically. And we all know it cannot happen automatically. No AI can take medicines on behalf of a person, right? But how close to impossible can we get is the mission of our foundation. And it's a combination of a software and hardware. And a good example it would be like if you're a heart failure patient and you're asked to take your weight every day, you shouldn't have to get on a scale, note your weight, see if there's sudden increase. I mean, if you sit on a commode and get off a commode, that weight should be taken, you should be notified, right? So it's really building those convenient, comfortable solutions that embed into lifestyle is the mission of our company.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shamo Patel. I head up the science organization at a company called Oura Ring. We make this 4-gram wearable ring that measures your health, your sleep, your physiology. I'm a scientist, engineer scientist by training. Over the past 20 years, my work, the focus of my career has been on leveraging wearable technology to advance the understanding of health and the practice of medicine. So that's how I broadly describe what I do. And just talking about like the next 5 to 10 years, for me it's like important to reflect on the last, let's say, 15 years or so. And one of the transformations that we have seen in our society is that we are becoming a much more empowered healthcare consumers, everybody here. Just some of the latest stats are that there are more than 1 billion people across the world who have a wearable device that they own and use. In the US, I think the number is close to 50% of the adults have a wearable device. And I think what this has led to is a fundamental transformation in our understanding of health as individuals. I think we are much more empowered with data and insights on a daily basis. And this empowerment I think is going to lead to the transformation of how we approach healthcare and medicine, over the next 5 to 10 years. And personally, I think that's something that I'm really excited about.
Hi, everyone. Oh, that was loud. Sorry. I'm Linda Mayhew, Senior Director of Clinical and Customer Success with a medtech company called Xandar Cardian. We have a radar-based vital signs monitor, monitors vital signs continuously and completely contact-free. So that is, I think, a big focus for us, and in thinking about where monitoring and this kind of technology will take us in the next 5 to 10 years. 10 years is pretty far out to try to predict, considering the pace of innovation. But even in the next 1 to 2 years, I think the drive for devices and information that can really feed accurately into some of these predictive models, and then getting those devices to integrate together and really build an ecosystem that paints an accurate picture of your patient's health over time. I think we're going to see a lot more demand for that, and we're really excited to be a part of that. And I have to kind of laugh because 40% of the women on this, or 40% of the people on this panel are named Linda. So go figure. Oh yes.
Thanks for the invite. My name is Ashu Sabarwal. I'm a faculty member in Rice University in electrical and computer engineering. I work on building new devices. So what would be the next generation variable? What should we measure? And also the other interest I have is understanding how human behavior impacts human health. And that, I think, has already been mentioned as one of the bigger challenges is what do we do with the data? Eventually a person has to act on it. How do we build that bridge? Also had an opportunity to start a few companies which are now build FDA-approved devices. So I had a chance to be on the other side of the picture too.
So as you see, this is a very diverse panel, and they're serving different populations. But we have an engineer, clinician, scientist, medical device, and but the one common theme that they're all trying to address is patient and clinician engagement. And they have slightly different approaches for it, but I'm curious, starting with Linda, being a nurse, how are you facing those challenges of getting adoption or use among patients and clinicians with your technology?
Well, I think the temptation, when we have these fantastic devices with lots of data, is to just kind of throw that data at somebody and assume that they, have the knowledge, the skill set, and the time to do it. Unfortunately, there is a staffing crisis when it comes to healthcare, and especially some of those frontline staff, and that's not going anywhere. So I think we, as device manufacturers or those that are kind of working in the space, really have to make efforts to to make that data palatable, understandable, usable, and not just try to shift the staffing crisis from acute care or long-term care into the community. And I mean, we really need to think about how people are engaging and using the data, and filtering it in a way that they can embed right into their existing workflows.
And Shyamal, Aura has an amazing brand, and so you, because I'm just curious to your approach with, you're getting patients that really want to wear your technology and use your technology, and I'm just, could you elaborate a little bit on how you approach that?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we are a consumer health technology product, right? The ring costs $300. That starts at $300, and you also need to pay $6 a month in subscription, right? Most of our customers, our members, are people who are, coming to us and buying our product and buying our membership because they want to be proactive about their health, and I would say largely they are healthy individuals, right? But as we look at us evolving as a company, we see that increasingly we are seeing that people are, coming to us with, because they have some concerns about their health or they are managing a chronic health condition, and they want the ring as a tool. So, talking about some of the challenges, and especially when it comes to things like, clinical problems and patients and healthcare providers. There are a few challenges, obviously, that we need to tackle. One of the challenges is access, right? We need to make sure that our technology, our product is accessible, irrespective of whether you are, somebody who can afford it or. So we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can improve the accessibility of our product. And some of the things that we've done are, things like making our product eligible for FSA, HSA, so you can use your, pre-tax dollars to purchase a ring. We've also partnered with health insurance companies to make make the ring available through their sort of insurance program. So a great example of this is our partnership with Essence Healthcare, where they have a Medicare Advantage plan, and as a part of the plan, eligible members will get an Aura Ring and the subscription covered for a year. And these are small things, but they're extremely powerful. The second thing that is needed is evidence, right? Especially when it comes to healthcare and making decisions, there is no replacement and no shortcuts to actually getting the evidence. And so this is something that as we work and as we, through these partnerships, we want to generate both evidence for health outcomes as well as economic outcomes that we are able to drive. And again, this is a long road, but this is something that we've already started investing in.
And Shri, you work with a lot of socially, economically disadvantaged folks. Any recommendations you have for engaging these populations?
No, thank you. Yeah, I think, anywhere around the world, what happens between a visit to a follow-up visit is a black box, right? So I think, how do we create habits and create the right motivation? So for example, like I'm just taking an example of maternity care. And then you give information like you're 8 weeks into your pregnancy and this is the size of your baby and these symptoms are normal, these symptoms are not normal. So to trigger that, need to engage, right? I think creating an environment like that so that they ask that question and then we proactively reach out. You just asked this question, looks a little serious, so we want to follow up with you. It could be same with blood pressure variations if we happen to know. That's one. And when they don't engage, the other persona that we interact with a lot in that space in Global South is the health worker. So the health worker reaches out to them and makes sure that, everything is okay and links them back to the physician. And it's really about keeping this continuity in a chronic care situation that drives a lot of difference.
Can I add a point?
Yeah, I
think there is a very successful wearable in this room that's called Glasses. Right? It's hugely successful.
The first wearable.
Yeah, it's the first wearable, right? And its reason is because it solves a real problem. It makes us see better. Everybody sees value in it. And as an example of another wearable, which is FDA approved, has changed people's life, is continuous glucose monitor. And the reason I think they are very successful is they're very targeted. They solve an actual need. With all due respect to other folks, I'm going to cause a little disruption in the panel. I'm not going to agree with some of these things. The crop of variables which we talk about are very general purpose. They measure heart rate, heart rate variability, maybe sleep, this and that. If you look at the evidence, broad evidence with all the studies done, the evidence is very mixed right now, if I'm being generous. Essentially, it associates with everything. And that's because if you're alive and your heart is beating, whatever condition you have, it will associate with that. So I think currently, in my opinion, we should focus a little bit more on targeted variables, which measure a specific thing and changes a specific condition, in my opinion. And I think there'll be higher opportunities. It may look like a smaller market, but it will solve a real problem. And I think that's, I feel, is one of the disconnect in our excitement around wearables like watches and this and that, and what the actual needs are in some of the conditions.
Can you give us an example? Because I know Rice recently partnered with Methodist Hospital as well.
Right.
And are you focused on those type of?
I have some colleagues, for example, they were looking at heart failure. They were trying to measure troponin, exactly what you need for heart failure risk, right? And eventually the first idea would be to build something like a glucometer equivalent for troponin risk, which you do at home. If that shows evidence, it will eventually become a wearable, something you put on. For somebody who's going through radiation therapy, you are now immune to infection, right? So your white blood cell count is down. Measure white blood cell count in that cases. So these are the examples. I think they're very hard problems. We don't know exactly to solve all of them, but there is specific reason to monitor for certain weeks or certain months is well specified because it immediately improves somebody's care. Somebody's life immediately improves if we could invent that. And I think that Maybe in some cases, the general purpose variables are very clear. That's what we need to have. We need to monitor somebody's heart rate, heart or something, then we'll do that. But for large part, I don't think they're really helping, in my opinion.
Can I respond to that? So I think the way I see it is it's actually a spectrum. So you look at wearables today, and maybe even just go around this hall, you will see a spectrum, and you have wearables like Apple Watches and Oura Ring. These are more like your daily tracking your. I think about them as like physiology, behavior, and context, right? Things that are happening in your daily life. But then you could have, at the other end of the spectrum, you could have very, very specific wearables. Maybe that's like a CGM. Maybe it's something that is specifically looking at like your heart rhythm, or something that is very focused, right? And so I think one of the exciting things about the last like 10, 15 years has been this evolution of the landscape, and as the fact that as consumers we have a lot of choice and options in terms of what we need. When Oura started 10 years ago, we started with a focus on sleep. So I actually the idea of focusing on a specific problem you want to solve, and then thinking about the technology as the solution rather than focusing on the technology and thinking what are the problems we want to solve, right? I think that's really, really powerful. But I think there is a distinction between technologies that are going to be broader in terms of the things that they'll be able to measure, and the types of things that the solutions that they will be able to deliver, right? If you look at the factors behind some of the healthcare problems, 40% I think of the factors are associated with lifestyle and behavior, right? So that's where I think wearables like the Oura Ring are really powerful, because they're helping you understand and measure your physiology, behavior, context during your daily life, and how that is connected with your health and the health outcomes that it's driving.
Can I just add? Yeah. So first of all, value point is, anything has to do with value, right? But when I go and attend like any USAID or World Health Assembly, the problem that we're really trying to tackle now is healthcare is so segregated. So there is HIV/AIDS oriented program, there's heart, and they're working really, really hard to bring healthcare back into integrated care. So I see the value from a precision perspective, but also I think we should learn lessons from just going so deep into precision, because eventually it is more about integrated health, and we have more than one problem. It's not going to be one problem, to focus on one problem. So hopefully technology can balance that. Like you can customize things for that individual with a few devices that they may be wearing, but it should get the full information so you can take a holistic picture and solve the real problem. Right?
Yeah, and just to comment on, I love that you kicked this off. This is great. It's perfect. I think because this technology is new, and in many ways it's been really challenging to monitor patients in the community, especially continuously. So, bringing on wearables and new devices that have the capabilities of monitoring some of these vital signs, even just generally, we're learning an awful lot about what the body does when it's not sick. And I think, and I'm sure you're in the exact same boat, right? As soon as you start to see how the patterns of your normal vital signs, and how the depth of respiration changes day to day, and you start to really see how these parameters work together, that's really where you can actually build in some of that targeted science, right? So I don't know why I said it like that. It's not an air quotes thing. It's targeted science. But in any case, what we've seen with our devices, because they measure continuously and they measure at rest, and we get not only rates, but we get depth of respiration, we can see changes in motion, we can see actual different patterns. As we start to look at that data, stepping back and looking at the outcomes that are associated with that, looking retrospectively, we start to be able to say, okay, if let me think about how to say this. I can actually look at it and say, if I have all of these specific things that happen in this sequence, wow, that actually can be tied to something like, a UTI, or leading to higher proportion of sepsis or something like that, right? So it allows us to really start to build the recipe for how do we get to those outcomes. And when we have the recipe, we can actually work backwards and start training models and being much more intelligent about how these algorithms are put together and how we use this general data in a very specific way.
Can I add to that? So I actually have a specific example of that. So during the COVID pandemic, there was this large study that was done. It was like basically a decentralized study called TempPredict. UCSF ran that study. And there were 65,000 Aura Ring users who signed up for that study, right? And completely decentralized. They did a lot of the kind of testing associated with COVID and collected a massive data set. And one of the things that they found, because of this sort of longitudinal continuous data, was that the researchers were able to see that the physiology was changing about a day or two before most people started reporting symptoms, and then they took a test. So the science that came out of that was that, when you're developing, let's say, an acute respiratory illness, you might be able to actually predict that, or not predict, or detect early some of the symptoms, and maybe it gives you a window to test, maybe isolate, maybe take some sort of prophylactic measures that might help you kind of address some of the issues. So I think, for me, I think one of the most powerful things about wearable technology is that we have this new instrument that is on our bodies 24/7, or maybe not, it's not even wearables, maybe it's technology that are around us. And we are able to see or understand our health through the lens of this instrument. And the way I think about it is it's as powerful as thinking about any other instrument that has led to new discoveries in health and medicine, like an MRI, X-ray machine, ECG, the stethoscope. I feel like with every new technological innovation, it has led to a step change in our understanding of health, and that is exactly what I think is going to be the impact of wearables.
But there are engineering challenges with these technologies, and whether it be data capture, accuracy, reliability, interoperability is some. I'm curious, what are the major engineering challenges that you're facing, especially maybe starting with Ashu, since you've so focused on sensors and accuracy?
Well, I kind of have two parts, so the one with, I think all of them who actually build these devices recognize how you use them in the wild quite different. So the data, and I think those are being handled nicely with new onboard algorithms, so I won't comment on that. I'll actually pick on Shree's point that eventually what you want to do with the data, I think, is really crucial for that person. And so she talked about adherence, and I'll add a layer to it, which is self-efficacy. So what I think is most challenging is I get my data, I need to increase my self-efficacy. I want to feel more actually empowered and trust that I can do what I want doing and doing it correctly. And building self-efficacy or new habits or new trust in yourself, that I find to be most challenging in all our studies, right? When we run something, they can do something according to protocol for a few weeks, but have we built a habit? Have we built a self-efficacy that I can take care of myself? And that's really crucial for all the self-managed diseases. Most chronic diseases are self-managed. We have to take medication, we have to take insulin if I'm on insulin, and so on and so forth. So this building this trust in yourself, I think, is what I find to be probably the most challenging, beyond the science and beyond the engineering.
Well, and Linda's technology takes a different approach. You don't do anything, you're passive, and probably because it's a more high-risk population. Is that where you're seeing the use cases for the technology?
For us, the patients that seem to get the biggest benefit out of it are those that are at higher risk for clinical deterioration, but typically less monitored. So that might be, seniors, or those that are living in congregate shared spaces, or those who are newly diagnosed with conditions and living at home. Folks that have things like CHF and COPD. Anybody who, has the potential for a very high impact deterioration. So that's going to result in somebody going to hospital, readmissions, those kind of things. So For us, because our technology is non-invasive, it's continuous and autonomous and literally runs in the background. So set up your device, it'll monitor you continuously, and it can monitor you continuously for months and years, and you don't even realize it's there. So that's what's really powerful with it. It allows us to really understand what's normal for somebody, and then our algorithms help detect when things start to change, even if that's early. And actually, that's your point about COVID was so well said, because we saw the same thing. And actually, that really early detection that we know our technology is capable of can actually present as a challenge in actually building adoption, because if we notify you before you have a symptom, well, then it's very easy for somebody to go, well, I feel great. And then 2 days later, they realize they actually don't feel great. Sorry, I digressed.
Well, there's different options. At Best Buy, we're kind of device agnostic, but we claim to be opinionated, looking across the market, seeing what the best devices are out there. But there's Bluetooth, there's cellular, there's Wi-Fi, there's radar, and now you work with 6G and there's satellite technology. And I'm wondering, where is the industry going when it comes to remote patient monitoring? I know that's a slightly different maybe than consumer, but it could incorporate consumer products too. And I'm just curious how you see the industry progressing.
Yeah, I mean, I think where we really want to get to is, ubiquitous access to internet, whether it is through Wi-Fi, whatever. And the most important thing that the healthcare industry is really bad at complying is an interoperability standard, right? The interoperability standard has existed for a long time. Other industries have proven that, like if you take, finance or travel, it's not that hard. It's just because we are not too motivated to do it, unfortunately. So I think if we can get that Wi-Fi and interoperability, we will be there, as quickly as the industry complies. And that's where we need to try to get to. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about sort of technological challenges, it's like we think about some different aspects than like connectivity. Maybe that's what you're kind of talking about. But I think the thing that we are trying to tackle now is we have a lot of different pieces of information that we're capturing about a person, from sleep, stress, mental health, reproductive health with menstrual cycles, cardiometabolic health. And one of the key challenges for us is how do we connect the dots between all of these aspects and give you insights that are really personalized so you can take action on it. And also insights that are not, they're grounded in scientific evidence, and they're not just, something that are artifacts of, a generative model, right? And AI is a technology that is very exciting, but there are also a lot of challenges and pitfalls there, right? So we need to navigate this, and it's going to be really interesting over the next, maybe 2, 3, 5 years, where how we navigate towards building solutions that are really giving you the insights that are personalized, but they're also grounded in our understanding of, medicine and sort of clinical medicine. Yeah.
Are there any additional emerging features or technologies that you see on the horizon?
It's maybe not an emerging technology, but it's certainly a consideration. If we think about remote patient monitoring in the strictest sense, according to CMS, in terms of reimbursement, I think, if we want to get bang for our buck, sometimes it's a matter of combining different technologies and really getting the data that you need specific to that patient. And I think the traditional reimbursement models haven't necessarily caught up with that, or they haven't recognized that sometimes a patient needs more than one thing. And what I would like to see, and obviously our shift towards value-based care and some of the different approaches that we're starting to take with new CPT codes, I think is a step in the right direction. But in order for remote patient monitoring and bringing care home to actually take off, it needs to be able to be something that a physician group can do in a way that is profitable, dare I say profitable. At the very least, they need to be able to make enough money to keep their practices going and actually offer that service. So lots of different things that we can do and that can be offered, but I think sometimes the reimbursement can certainly be a barrier.
COVID had another impact, which is general acceptance of health monitoring at home. And that, I think, moved by 10x, maybe 100x in a matter of 2 years, right? It was tricky. We were going along slowly, many conferences talking about same thing. When will wearables have an impact, or home monitoring will have an impact? COVID demonstrated that telemedicine broadly could be very impactful. And technology at home. Pulse ox suddenly became, the device for everyone to buy. And of course, smartwatches and others had pulse ox. But I think that acceptance level has really shot up. And that's actually an opportunity for all of us to do something with that high acceptance level, both on the clinical side and on the patient side.
Do you want to close this out?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a combination. So the device that we're building is trying to make it very convenient to get multiple vitals in one shot. So that device now has an SpO2 chip, a blood pressure chip, and there's so many things. Now, we got a big funding from the government of India to do the system on a chip. So it's like just one chip that does everything, right? It has to, it's very technical in terms of the silicon, all technology changing and all that. But that I think is very promising. Then it becomes a wearable that can do a lot of things.
Can I
Against what Ashutosh was suggesting, but my good.
I work on it, but I wanted to throw a bomb anyway.
So I think if you look at the world of wearables today, what we have largely done is taken existing technologies and miniaturized them and packed them into a wearable form factor as small as a ring, right? So that's essentially what we have done so far. Just looking ahead, I think what we are going to see is one, new ways of interpreting the data that these technologies that are there today are capturing. And the second one would be fundamentally new types of sensing that we are going to be designing and inventing that are specifically designed with the idea of continuous tracking using wearables. And that's, I think, really exciting. There's a lot of great work. I'm sure Ashu and his team are doing some really great work, but that's going to be something that takes us into the next era, right? Not just like what we know and understand, let's just make it wearable and continuous, but like what can be possible in the future.
Love that. Thank you. This has been a fascinating conversation, and we're not done yet. Now we're going to transition to the round tables. We'll have the women pioneers at that table, and then continuation of the wearable and connected device conversation at this table. So we welcome you to join the conversation, and thank you.